All of the videos, songs, images, and graphics used in this video belong to their respective owners, and I or this channel does not claim any right over them. Make sure to listen with headphones for a more audio immersive experience. I dare you to listen with the lights off. Tonight on Beyond the Veil. I have been a cult leader for almost 10 years. I lost control of it. Let me start by saying the obvious. I am not a good person. I have no excuse for what I did. 10 years ago, I was living on a friend's couch. I was out of a job. I had no savings, no family. I had just failed my last get-rich scheme and was looking for anything to make a quick buck. My friend had less than reputable activities and had just come into ownership of a shipment of crystals. He thought they were valuable, but was deeply mistaken. If there is one thing to know about me, it's that I'm a great salesman. That's my one skill. I can't do anything else. If I had the work ethic to hold a job, that could have been my way to success. Instead, I was running schemes and failing since I left high school. So, I started selling crystals, healing crystals. Funny how just adding one word and some convincing make the price skyrocket. In a month, I sold all of it. It made me enough cash to fund my next venture. But more importantly, I made contacts. I wasn't the only one in that line of business. Some sold stuff like I did. Handcrafted charms, written sutras, blessed water, carved animal bones. Anything could be worth a fortune if sold the right way. That wasn't where the real money was made, though. Mystical gurus, faith healers, spiritual coaches, those guys were making bank. I went to their gatherings to peddle my crystals and saw how they operated. I wasn't impressed by any of them. They were sloppy, too obvious, but the crowd effect still made it work. You see, if you manage to have a few people completely convinced with the right environment, it spreads like wildfire. Peer pressure makes magic happen, and then you've got a crowd chanting whatever you want them to chant. I saw a bunch of different crooks selling their philosophy, and the crowds that fervently followed them. I saw an opportunity. This was sales, and if a bad salesman can do that well, who knows how far I could get. I needed a product, a hook. Most of the spiritual fads were covered by one or more goofies in my area, so I went with something a bit more obscure. I went dark. Occultism, blood rituals, demonology. I thought this would get me the most desperate sheep, The ones ready to turn to anything to solve whatever problem they thought couldn't be solved. It worked brilliantly. I knew there were a lot of desperate people in my area, but I didn't think it was this bad. Not a good sign for society, but it worked great for me. I used my gains from the crystal sales to buy books and accessories, everything to make me look like the real deal. And mythical occultists with mysterious powers addressed the part 2. Black robes and all kinds of demonic trinkets. For the first few months, I managed on bluff alone. I started to have more and more followers. I did rituals with them, inspired by the books I got. With some clever positioning, I made it look like the collection of books I had were part of a much larger one. I solved a few of their problems with a bit of cash to the right person and what amounted to basic coaching and counseling. But for the rest, the only thing I could do was pretend they just didn't believe hard enough. After that, things started to get a bit rough. They started noticing that nothing we were doing was actually helping them. I mean, burning sage covered in menstrual blood in a cemetery during a full moon might look impressive, but it's not going to stop your husband from cheating on you. I could see trouble brewing. My original plan was to pack up and leave when I would get to that stage. Through donations and membership fees, I had already collected a substantial sum. I had enough to enjoy life for a few months and find something else to do. But I got greedy. I wanted to keep going. A few of my followers were completely convinced I was the real deal. So I used them. I'm not going to give details and incriminate myself. I will let you picture what happened. Let's just say that demon-worshipping fanatics without conscience are great problem solvers. From that point on, it snowballed. Each problem solved by my loyal followers made every single one of them more loyal. They recruited more, solved their problems, and they became devout followers themselves. A self-sustaining circle. If you don't take into account the karmic weight of my actions, which I don't, everything was going perfectly. A fully functioning cult. If you are wondering why you never heard of us, well, blackmail has always been an efficient tool which, coupled with making scapegoats of anyone who left and cleaners, kept information about us under control. It also helped that our group never actually had a name, an oversight on my part that actually ended up working in our favor. It made our size difficult to evaluate, as groups in different locations tended to use different rituals to identify themselves, making it look like small independent groups instead of one large organization. At that point, I did what all successful cults do. We build ourselves a compound. I had my own quarters, the size of a luxury mansion with all the amenities you can imagine. Some of the more reliable members of the group had their own room, while the rest were living in dorms. The library was as big as I pretended it was when I started. We had probably one of the largest collections of books and occult items ever assembled. As far as I know, at least. This kind of thing tends to not be public. I started delegating all of my work to the most respected members of the cult. This was my goal, after all. I could finally reap the benefits of my work. I was almost entirely retired. I could enjoy whatever I wanted. Delicious food, alcohol, women, drugs. Anything I could want was mine. I let the cult run itself, and if you remember the title of my post, that's where things went wrong. I don't believe in the occult, in demons and all that stuff. But my cult did. After all, it worked for them. They followed the ritual and got whatever they wanted. They didn't know that someone else inside the cult actually did it for them. Sometimes as a part of their own ritual, sometimes as a tribute to the cult. They had the belief. They had the knowledge and tools from the well-stocked library. And after I retired, they had the freedom to try and experiment. The fact is, most of what was in those books was nonsense, but for a few, it wasn't. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen what I have seen. For the last couple of years, I rarely met anyone from the cult. Only a few reports from the higher-ups that I barely listened to. A few months ago, I was getting low on supplies, which was strange. They religiously kept everything topped up for their great leader. So, I cleaned myself up a bit, put on my robe, and went to remind them of my greatness. When I got to the door to their side of the compound, I was first surprised by the silence. The place was always buzzing with activity, and I could usually hear it far before opening the door. It was confusingly quiet. The second thing hit me when I opened the door. A smell of rot, burning, and sulfur. I covered my nose and my eyes started watering. I went back for a bit and dipped an old shirt with some perfume and tied it up around my nose and mouth to protect myself from the smell. I walked the hallways without seeing anything at first, until I passed in front of one of the dorms. The door had been smashed open, apparently from the inside. It was now embedded in the opposite wall. The thick metal door had been hit with such force that the door frame and part of the wall came with it. I stood there incredulously for a while, considering what might have done that. It looked like a bomb had exploded, but without any scorch marks. I took a look inside, only to find it completely barren. I took a few steps in the room, only illuminated by the light coming from the broken door frame. It was the same as when it was first constructed, apart from the color of the walls, ceiling, and floor. They were now sporting a reddish-brown hue, the color of dried blood. I turned and stepped out of the room. Leaning against the hallway wall, I noticed that I hadn't taken a breath since I got in. I took a deep breath. The smell, the perfume covering my mask, mixed with the smell of rot, made me dry heave. I collected myself and headed down the hallway. There were more dorms that way, but I was more anxious about the unknown horrors of the rest of the compound. Better the devil you know, as they say, almost literally in my case. Plus, this was the shortest path. From what I remembered, there were 2 more dorms on the way. The first one was still closed. The same heavy metal door had been installed and looked solidly in place. Pushed by some morbid curiosity, I opened the metal flap that was on the door, the same kind that was on prison doors. When I did, the now familiar smell of rot wafted over me. Contrary to the other one, this room was still lit up. There was no movement inside. The bunks were cleanly lined up as they were when we first set up the dorms. Each bed was occupied by an unmoving shape. An arm hanging from one of the beds closer to the door confirmed what I was thinking. They had died in that room a while back from what I could see. I kept walking and reached the last dorm on this side of the compound. I was expecting the same thing as the last one, since the door was still in place. But as I got closer, I saw a cleanly cut hole in the metal door. The hole was big enough for a person to go through. I hesitated for a while, wondering if I should just keep going. I had seen the traces of terrible events in the rooms before, but nothing gruesome enough to stay burned in my mind. I thought this room would be the same, no risk in taking a quick look. I was instantly proved wrong. I looked through the hole for less than a second, and I will never forget the image. A perfectly arranged spiral made of cut-up body parts. The center of the spiral rose almost to the ceiling. At the top of the gory pile stood a throne of bone and sinew. All of it was perfectly arranged, perfectly aligned with no imperfections. Each member that was part of it had been cut with incredible precision. It was a gruesome piece of art, carefully crafted, and as good art does, it filled me with emotion. It was beautiful in a way, regal, intimidating. It terrified me that someone or something had created it. I walked a few steps down the hallway before removing my mask and throwing up on the floor. I put my forehead against the wall, breathing heavily. I stayed like that for a few minutes before deciding to keep going. I had to get out as soon as possible. Considering everything, one thing actually made me more confident. Whatever happened, it was over. The compound was completely silent. The things that caused what happened in those dorms were not here anymore. I reached the end of the hallway and entered the main temple. Strangely, it hadn't changed at all. I walked to the center as I used to, passing the rows of black pews arranged in a circle around the main altar. The altar was as I remembered, a simple pulpit adorned with symbols and amulets hanging on all sides. On it was an envelope addressed to me. The first page got a nervous chuckle out of me. They knew. My faithful disciples knew I was a fraud. I could feel the hatred in the words on that page. It explained in detail the growing mistrust that started from the time the compound was built. How they saw me show less and less effort, focusing more on earthly luxuries. They first theorized that I was testing them to see which of them could proceed without my guidance. It made them work harder at first. I had done such a good job indoctrinating them that it took them a long time to realize what I had done. The page ended with a surprising thank you. No matter what my motivation was, I had given them purpose. I had given them resources to bring forth something bigger than all of us. For these reasons, they would let me live. I had done my part. From the second page, they explained what had happened since my retirement. The books from my library had some truth in them. At first, it was small rituals that helped them accomplish things that could be done as easily by hand. But they learned from it, developed them. They made untraceable poisons. They cursed targets with madness. It helped them increase the numbers of followers exponentially. After all, they became the real thing. The text that followed explained what happened in the compound. They wrote that they used the dorms and the pits as a catalyst to evolve mankind. I read the part about the dorms, eager for some explanation. I don't know if you know about Kadoku, the poison jar ritual. The idea is that you put 100 venomous insects inside a jar, and when there is only one left alive, its poison will be powerful enough to kill anyone. Well, looks like in the right conditions, it works with humans too. The followers went willingly into the dorms, locking themselves up until one of them transcended. The writing explained that the first rituals failed completely. It started with some unrest within the community, unnerved by the pointless deaths of their companions. They doubled down and, having learned from the first tries, what followed was a resounding success. They had brought forth entities that defied their wildest expectation, giving them the tools to further their plans. The letter didn't say anything else about it, worryingly. The next part of the letter talked about the remaining followers, the one that didn't volunteer for the dorm. As the rituals in the dorms required willing participants, they had to find an alternative. So they made the pits, deep holes with a seed at the bottom of them. They didn't explain how the seed was made, but I assume it involved more unholy machinations. They forced the rest of the followers into the pits, some by dragging them, some by threatening, some by force. They kept at it until none were left. Only the most devout, the most knowledgeable were left. They didn't stay to see if the pits would succeed. It didn't matter. The ritual was done. The results wouldn't need them either way. They all went their separate ways. They would rebuild, recruit more followers, each one going to a different place. They would continue the process over and over until they finally brought humanity into its next form. The letter ended with the words, "As it started here, everywhere is where it shall end." I left the temple by the main door. I was outside for the first time in months. The warmth of the sun was only comforting for a few moments as I found myself in front of two pits, one on my left and one on my right, only separated by a narrow-looking path that led out of the cult's land. The pit to the right was empty. I decided to go around it instead of risking taking the narrow path. It wasn't wide enough to look safe, and taking the way around seemed like a better idea. I walked a comfortable distance from the pit and took a few glances as I moved. I couldn't see the bottom of it. For some reason, the light seemed to be dimmed by the pit itself, stopping shorter than it should. As I reached the other side of the pit, I saw some tracks leading away from the pit into the surrounding forest. They were deep, but rain had made them muddy, making them difficult to identify. They were larger than my own. I followed them with my eyes, curious to see where they started. They came directly from the pit and were surrounded by impossibly large claw marks at the edge of it. Understandably, I started moving faster. I would rest when I was somewhere else, but I heard a voice, a call for help coming from the other pit. I approached it to take a look, not completely believing what I was hearing. I wasn't far enough gone that I would ignore someone in trouble right in front of me. I don't remember exactly what I saw inside. Even now, My head hurts when I try to think about it. I remember only two things. The first thing is one I would like to forget, like the spiral throne I saw in the dorm. In the pit, I saw an eye. I remember seeing it deep in the pit, seemingly occupying all of it. Its color was changing smoothly, different shades dancing unnaturally. It was looking right at me, its pupils slowly widening. Then it blinked, and I remember running. I ran as fast as I could until I reached the fence surrounding the compound. It was a considerable distance for someone in as bad a shape as I was. My heart and lungs were hurting like hell, but I kept running, pushed by an instinct older than man. After I crossed the fence, my escape from the compound went smoothly. After all, I always expected to be found out at some point and prepared for it. I left the letter there, minus the first page that mentioned me. I hope it helps whoever finds it. I had a vehicle and a change of clothes hidden close by. I would remember seeing a large number of police cars going to the compound. Luckily, at that point, I was far away enough to not arouse suspicion. I still had access to some of my hidden bank accounts, so I bought a bunker far away from anything, stocked up with anything I could ever need. I can stay there for the rest of my life, and I probably will. I am sharing my story as a warning, but I realize now that my advice won't be of any help. I know better than most that people can be tricked. I don't know what my former followers want, but it can't be good. There are things out there that defy understanding. I hope that none of you get to meet them. As I said in the beginning, I am not a good person. I played my part in something terrible, no matter what my own goals were. I won't say I'm sorry. My apologies are worthless at this point. I have no excuse anyway. I acted as I wanted from start to finish. Instead, I will end with this. Good luck. Make sure to like, comment, and share. Until next time.